Okay, school is back in full swing, and you know what that means. We are studying, we are being productive, and we are becoming straight A students. Okay, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing a part 2 to my becoming a straight A student video. If you haven't watched that, maybe go watch that first if you are watching this one, because there is where I talk about how I study mostly for like midterms and memorization, time management and planning, as well as study environment and that kind of stuff, kind of just a general overview of everything. But I decided I would make a part 2 and just touch on a few more things, because I know school can be so stressful and there can be so much pressure internally and externally about grades and just doing well. So whether you're in high school or college, here are some more tips and just advice to help out with studying and being the best you can and getting the best grades that you can. So something I did not talk about in the last video, but is such an important step to any project or specifically paper, is editing. I feel like editing is more important than even the writing of your paper. It is the editing that changes everything and makes the paper readable and just flow well. I don't know why I didn't know this, but until like third year of university, I did not have Grammarly. Grammarly, I didn't realize could be free, but it is. You can just add the free extension onto your laptop. In my opinion, this is even more important than that, but having someone to read over your paper and edit for you is key. So for me, I usually got my older sister to read over my papers and edit for me, but you can get anybody, maybe a peer in the class, a friend, your mom even, or yeah, your sibling. It doesn't really matter. You can buddy up with anyone and exchange papers, but having someone else to read your paper is so important, because even after you've written your paper and you're editing it yourself, there are things that you're gonna look over and miss, or things that might make sense to you, but they're not actually gonna come across and read how you think they are to other people. I know it can be so hard to find someone to edit your paper. People just don't have time, or they're not really interested in reading like a 5-page paper on a topic they know nothing about. So if you can't get someone to edit it for you, I would suggest reading your paper out loud. By reading it out loud, you can catch mistakes and awkward phrasing that you might not have caught if you were just reading it in your head or when you're typing it. So reading your paper out loud is always a good idea, especially if you don't have someone else to edit it for you. For papers in general, it's always a good idea to just get your ideas down and then edit it later to make it sound good. If you're trying to craft like the perfect sentence and make everything sound nice at the beginning, I feel like it's gonna set you behind. It can also lead to the procrastination, because if I can't like get through a certain chunk of the paper, then I'm not gonna work on the rest. I'm gonna take a break and come back to it. So what I always do just when I'm writing my paper is I'm making a point and I need a line of evidence and I don't have that evidence, or I don't know what evidence is gonna support the point that I made. For the next sentence, I'm just gonna say blank, and I'm just gonna write blank in big capital letters so I know I can just come back to it. If I'm in Google Docs, I also just highlight the blank and make a note on the side saying like, find the evidence for this, or I wanna say this, but I don't know how to. So this is really helpful for me. It just helps me push forward and keep going with the paper and not get caught up. This is kind of similar to just when you're writing a test, and if you can't answer the question, you're gonna skip over it and make a note to come back to it. It's kind of the same idea, just so you're not getting stuck on one thing. Now let's talk oral presentations, aka my worst nightmare. I know this is the same for a lot of people. It can be so nerve-wracking going up in front of a classroom or even a lecture hall and having to present. If you're blessed and you're a great presenter and just feel confident up there, then I wish I was you. I've actually only had to do 2 presentations in university, but I know it can depend on your major and the classes you take, and also in high school and elementary school, I was definitely doing a lot more. So here are a few tips. There's definitely no easy fix to becoming just an amazing speaker, but here are some things that have helped me. So the first thing that I do is over prepare. For me, I like to know exactly what I'm gonna say, and I like to practice that and memorize that, and then when I'm going up in front of the class, I can be a bit more natural with it because I've practiced it so much that it comes more naturally, and then I can just relax a bit more. Unless you are a naturally great performer, great speaker, being underprepared is really gonna throw you off. So just make sure you know what you're gonna say, and if you need to memorize it, make sure you have that memorized so you don't need to think about another thing while you're presenting. So along with that, I recently listened to a Jay Shetty podcast. I'll put the episode below, but I found it very helpful. Specifically, he was talking about if you are anxious to visualize yourself going through this challenging moment. And basically this is important because it allows you to feel the emotions before you're actually in the situation. So for instance, if you're gonna do an oral presentation, I would say practice in front of your friends or family. Even if it's just one person, do this before you actually go in front of the class, because that way you're allowing yourself to feel the emotions, feel the fear, and go through the movements. And then when you're in the actual situation, it's gonna be a little bit less nerve-wracking. He also touched on something really interesting, I thought, with visualization, and that is not only to visualize it going perfectly, but to visualize what you think is gonna go wrong and then how you're going to react to that and adapt. That is definitely important because inevitably we are human and we're gonna make mistakes when we're speaking in front of the class or doing a presentation, and knowing how to take a breath and just respond to that and not spiral is gonna be very helpful. Another thing that can really help is doing some deep breathing. If I know my presentation is coming up in 2 people, my heart is gonna start like pounding, I start getting sweaty and all stressed out, my body starts reacting. So deep breathing exercises can help with that. I usually do breathe in through the nose for 4, hold for 7, and breathe out through the mouth for 8. And I just do that a couple times until I feel a bit more relaxed, because if your body is anxious and you are anxious, you're not going to be able to present as well as you want to. So breathing will definitely help calm you down. Lastly, I would say get creative. So for instance, I had to do a presentation with a group and we were presenting a creative project that we made. So instead of creating like a magazine or something and then speaking about it, we decided to create a video. And that way all we had to do was press play and watch that and then just say a few words on it after. So that cut down the time we actually needed to speak and present orally. Another way to get creative is maybe involving some of the class and making it more of an activity so it feels less like a presentation and more like you're leading a group thing. If you're allowed to get creative with things, you can add more activities into your presentations. For instance, a Kahoot or something where the class is participating so it doesn't feel like you're just standing up there and everyone's just staring at you. So another thing I wanted to touch on was course selection. I think one of the easiest semesters that I did in university was actually the semester that I took 5 courses instead of 4, and I thought it was going to be so stressful. I thought I was not going to have time for everything, but it actually was the easiest and most enjoyable semester for me. I think it was my easiest semester because of the fact that all of the courses followed a similar theme or had kind of like a interconnectedness almost. So I was in some psychology courses and also some like nursing courses and elective in urban forestry, but all throughout all of them they had a theme of like well-being and health, and because of that I was able to use knowledge from one course and use it in another one. So for instance, I had to do a project in my health psychology class, so you could pick the topic in relation to health. I was also in an urban forestry class that talked about well-being in urban forests, so I was able to take knowledge from that course and use that and talk about like green spaces in a health psychology setting. So I know everyone cannot do this and it does really depend on your major, but if you are able to group courses together in each semester and they kind of follow a similar line, maybe even if not all of them do, but even just like 2, it really helps, and it also just in general enhances your learning because you're thinking about a similar topic from all different perspectives and points of view. So I would highly suggest that. So along the line of using knowledge from your other courses, I would suggest always keeping your notes from your previous classes, from the previous years and whatnot, because I have found it has been really helpful for me when I'm like 2 years later doing a project and I remember we talked about something similar in another class and I want to go back and look at that, and I already have the notes obviously, so keeping those and being able to look back on them is really helpful. So I would highly suggest saving your notes because you can often use them next semester or even a year later. I have saved actually like my psychology notes from high school even, and sometimes I will look back on those or like the study guides that I made because a lot of things build off of each other. It can also be a really big time saver because you don't have to go out and seek all that information. You can just look back at your old notes. So next thing is, do not lose marks on little things, specifically formatting. Before you hand in any project, assignment, paper, make sure you go back to the instructions and read what the formatting needs to be. I have lost so many little marks on this stuff, and I know so many people who have as well. For instance, a person I know didn't write their name and their student number and they lost like 5 points for that. And then personally, I have lost marks for not italicizing the journal name in APA formatting in the reference list. My friend also lost marks for handing in her paper in a different format. So for instance, if it's supposed to be handed in as a PDF and you hand it in as a Word doc by mistake, I've even forgotten to hand something in that I had finished. It was totally ready to go, done and everything, and I just didn't hand it in, so it was late and I lost 5%. So don't lose marks over the little things like that, especially the formatting ones that are so easy to fix. Make sure you double space or single space, the right font size, the right margins, everything like that, so you're not losing marks over easily avoidable things. On the flip side of that, make sure you're taking advantage of every single point that you can get, every single bonus mark available to you. So for instance, at my university, if you're in a psychology class, you can participate in other studies that students are doing, and you can get up to 3% extra on your final grade. And 3% may not seem like a lot at the time, but when you get your final grade and you're boosted 3%, that can really change your average or even your letter grade. I've also had a prof who hid something in the syllabus. In the first week, she said the only task you needed to do was read through the syllabus. Luckily, I actually did it, which honestly I don't usually, but I would suggest doing it because within the syllabus, there was a hidden thing where if you emailed the TA the certain thing, then you would get an extra bonus point. So just make sure you're taking advantage of any bonus point that you can get. Along with this, I would also say take advantage of any help the prof is offering you. This may just be through office hours, but I've also had situations where we had a final paper and the prof offered one-on-one sessions with each student to discuss their thesis and make sure they were on the right track. And I'm very glad that I actually did that because she ended up saying that I needed to change my thesis. So if they're offering you something, take advantage of that, because for me that was very rewarding. Essentially, the person who was going to grade my paper was giving me tips on it and how to improve it before I got too far into it. This is kind of obvious and maybe even redundant, but in terms of saving time, just pay attention in class. I have noticed that in the past, sometimes I would go to class, I'd be so sleepy and I would just like zone out, or I would start getting distracted on my laptop and doing like other things, online shopping, whatever. And then I would go home and I would realize like I didn't pay attention in part of it and I'd have to reteach myself that part. So since you're already going to class, since you already have to go to class, just try to pay attention so that you're not adding extra work on top of that. So in the last video, I didn't discuss any note-taking strategies, but for me, what I do is just copy and paste all of the slides into a Google Doc, and then I just add on to them and type notes. I know a lot of people like to use like an iPad or whatever, but I feel like for psychology, it's not as much needed. In first year, I did handwrite some notes, but at this point, you can't keep up, and since COVID, a lot of things are online, so I would suggest just doing what works for you. Just taking notes on Google Docs is what works for me. So I love organization. As I talked about in the other video, I use a physical planner, but along with this, I didn't mention that I will also type out daily to-do lists and schedules in just notes on my laptop. So every day I will just put the day of the week and I write down all the things I need to do. I'll even like write out things that I'm gonna do them anyways, like eat lunch, because every time I do something, it makes me feel more productive and so accomplished that I've done this one small thing, and it can just motivate you to keep going. So when things get especially crunchy and busy, specifically during final season, I'll actually draw out like a physical calendar on a piece of paper and just color code when I'm gonna study and when things are due or when tests are. This is kind of extra, and I know it might not be needed if you already have a planner, but for me, I liked seeing it all laid out, and I would actually like pace when I need to study each chapter or each lecture by. Often I would give myself a little bit of extra time so that when I checked it off, I could get ahead of schedule, and that obviously made me feel very good. And it can just be good to see it all laid out and see how much you need to study. Readings are another thing that I don't love to do. In first year, I would do like all the readings. I would read the whole chapter or whatever. But I would say now I realize that readings are not as important as I thought. It also adds like multiple hours onto your study time if you're gonna read like 2 chapters every week. But I would say if you are gonna do the readings, always take notes, because just reading isn't really a great study technique. I feel like if you're gonna be reading, you need to be either taking notes or making connections or something more than just reading, because it's not gonna be very helpful. One thing I do wanna say as well is before I went to university, I was so scared. I thought the profs were gonna be super strict and not very relatable, not really wanting to talk with you, but I found that it is definitely not like that. The profs tend to care a lot about your mental health and they want to help if they can. So just never be afraid to ask for help, and also don't be afraid to ask for an extension if you need one. It's always a good idea to email the prof if you are struggling or if you are in a really hard time and you need a bit more time with your paper or your project. They usually are pretty reasonable and understanding. So yeah, just never be afraid to talk to them if you have any problems. So those are all of the tips that I have to become a better student. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope it was helpful. If you haven't watched part 1, definitely go do that. I'll put it up here or down below. And yeah, good luck on your projects, your midterms, your assignments, your studying, whatever you're doing. Good luck, you got this, and I'll see you next time. Bye.